Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our second episode of Not Financial Advice. The reception we got to the first episode was pretty substantial. I mean, I didn't expect it. I knew me and Sean had some great chemistry. We did a video before that got 30,000 views that had great retention. People really liked us. That was a one-off interview. You're like, all right, maybe it happens sometime. And then you're like, let's see if we could do it again. And I think all in all, we got about 2,000 people to watch that with all the clips together, and people really enjoyed listening to Sean talk and me sitting back and letting him talk, which is kind of the plan going. I just get to sit here and enjoy the show. All right, so we're going to get into some topics today. Our first issue for today is a bit more geopolitical and how it relates to economics. We have Russia, the United States, and China. Lots and lots of things going on. Sean, I'll hand it to you. What is your take on the current geopolitical enigma that we're having right now, and how do you think it affects what's going on in the macro?
Yeah, so first things first, I appreciate that you got the memo that we expect shirt and ties on the show for a host. So, we're aligned. I got dressed up as well.
Did you see my skit today?
No, I haven't been home. I just got home. So
okay, I did the Wolf of Wall Street skit for 9 days. You're gonna love it. So that's why I had to wear this. Yes.
Okay, I can live with that. That works. So yeah, I think what I want to start with was a little bit higher level for those who are sort of new to this, because I think that terminology gets lost in the weeds a bit. And we hear things that get said, but no one really takes a minute to explain it. And then because it doesn't get explained, you're building knowledge on top of maybe shaky ground. So before we even jump into the US, China, Russia, I want to just first of all speak to the fact that the days of talking about developed and undeveloped or underdeveloped nations are over. What we're really talking about is standardized and stable markets and emerging and less stabilized markets. I think it's an important note because it's going to underscore this conversation here a bit. So in general, we're talking about sort of the collaboration of major countries in the globe, excluding the US and Europe. Well, we're often talking about this idea of the BRICS. Okay, so the BRICS is essentially just an acronym that stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and actually pretty much very recently, South Africa as well. So the reason I'm calling this out is it's important to understand that there is a collaboration that goes on between these groupings of large economies. And you could argue that some are more stabilized or less emerging than others. Some are sort of more on the come up perspective, but all have a major role across the globe that we all live in, whether we like it or not. And I think also I want to lay it out that no matter how much we like to talk about things being disconnected or nationalized or localized, the reality is we live within a web. The web touches everything, and it's not always obvious how it's connected, but it's part of being a good investor, understanding the way geopolitical issues roll out and the impacts it has at a localized level. It's important to understand that you can't avoid it even if you want to. There will be a web that has some degree of separation between you and the problem that's going on, even if it feels like it really isn't there. So the reason I wanted to start there is because I think it's an important distinction to get the conversation started, which is this. We've heard this thing, especially in the US, where they say, $40 billion to Ukraine. Why the hell will we send $40 billion to Ukraine? Yep. That's money we could use for schools, for security, for infrastructure, for whatever, depending on which side of the aisle you stand on, right? But the problem is we're taking a very localized, nationalized approach to understanding the web and how it affects us from a geopolitical perspective. And it's important that people really open their eyes and start to see that this interconnected way of tying things together is a balance of power. Right? At any given time, for the conversation we're having right now, if you imagine a pie chart, right? Just a circle, and we put three lines on the chart, US, Russia, China. At any given time, the power and size of the economy and strength and persuasion in global markets is ebbing and flowing. Sometimes the US really has a dominant position. Sometimes China really has a dominant position. Sometimes Russia finds a way to steal a little bit from each side of it. And the way they do this is it's not just in terms of GDP or productivity of their workforce. It's in how they invest globally into countries. The same way that a VC competes with another VC by trying to get earlier stages and even earlier stages. And now we buy companies just to get the brains behind the companies. This is happening at a geopolitical perspective where China's saying hey, look, North Korea has this crazy guy in charge of it, but we're going to go and help them because he's ultimately powerful. He has a nuke. And the US is saying look, we can't let Russia take control of this region because they're going to control the energy. We have to now support the Ukraine, aside from a number of other reasons, of course. But from this perspective, it's because we need to remain in control of those energy reserves and also protecting our partners in Europe. And Russia's perspective is that they need to find places where they can actively engage. Maybe that's in Africa, maybe it's South America, wherever it is. So it's important to understand that at any given time, this perspective of the ebb and flow of power, influence, and control is always happening. Whether we choose to look at it or not, it's irrelevant. That is the truth of what's happening. Above all the conversations about earnings and companies and hashtag this and trending that, at the very top levels, we have a planet that is in constant struggle for power. And when we hear these complaints about, but we could use that for something else, the reason you can turn your lights on, you have heat that comes in your house, you have food getting to the local grocery store or whatever, it's because across the globe we have a network, a chain that connects all the disparate pieces together, whether it's raw materials or currency rates or whatever it might be. It's a chain. We have to make sure our eyes are on every single loop on that chain, because if any one of them gets dented, cracked, or God forbid broken, that erupts in massive damage throughout. So as people are complaining about inflation and talking about supply chain issues, that's where that $40 billion comes into play, so that Ukraine can get back to farming wheat and grain and get back to making sure energy is flowing, right? That's a microcosm of a much bigger thing. But that's why it's so important to understand the impacts on how we relate and work with each other. Because if you think about it, we've got the US Democratic Republic, or democracy, right, to make it simple, with China, a communist state with, let's call it, pinpoints of democracy here and there, Hong Kong being a perfect example, right? And we know that we've got Russia, who is, theoretically a democracy, but really an oligarchy, right? So yes, they in general have a few major players running the show. So we've got three types of government systems competing for power based on different strengths that they have. The communist perspective, they control the economy. The Russian perspective, they have a gung-ho military. The US perspective, it's our ability to help and aid other countries globally. This is the foundation of investing or being even interested in politics at all, is that there has to be a maintenance of ebb and flow, and it's going to ebb and flow. That's the nature of the way we live. My final point on this before I let you get in a word edgewise is we also have to understand that we, as a Western modern civilization, I'm using that word a little bit tongue in cheek because it can always be argued, but we look at things and we say to ourselves like, yeah, we're gonna hammer Russia. We're gonna pound them with sanctions. And for those who don't know, sanctions in its simplest term is really making life tough from an economic perspective. It can be on people, on businesses, on banks, on energy,
it restricts
whatever.
Trade. It's very difficult for
companies. Yep. It's just a way to make life harder for lots of people who in turn you would think would go and start demanding change, demanding a new leader, etc. I think what we've learned is if you can control your economy and your currency in China, and you have strong war powers, that's a debatable topic, but you have the willingness to use your war powers, and you have been preparing for this, which is very obvious with what's going on right now with Russia. You can see how, like, even though the US appears super dominant across the board in a number of categories, when it came to brass tacks, all we really had was the ability to throw some money over the wall and hope we drown them in cash.
Yep.
And it creates an interesting conversation around sort of everything this whole show you and I are doing together is based on, which is you need to have the ability to, forget about the details in the 10K. Can you look straight up and get on top of the building and look up even further and start from the very, very top of where power is created and where the power drives all the way down into these investments? Because again, I'm going to call it out, in the US, we have our stock markets, we've got public enterprise, we've got private enterprise, we have earnings to talk about in companies and global players and FX exchange rates and all this great stuff. And it's a great thing. In Russia and China, we've got state-owned and controlled businesses that tell them what to do, when to do, and how to do it, and they'll back them if they need to be successful. And in Russia, although in theory a lot of things aren't state-owned, the people in charge of the state also own those companies. So ultimately, they're going to have that power behind them as well. So it's just one of those things where I wanted to level set here that in the simplest way to think about it is, we talked on the last show about this idea of like, it's not just chess, it's 3D chess, and it's global scale of chess. And at any given time, if you're worried about where $40 billion of aid goes, you're thinking about it from a localization perspective, and we're talking about a globalization perspective. And it's important to understand in the scheme of things, that's not 40 billion to, I don't mean this to be crass because I don't mean it this way, but it's not 40 billion to like buy more guns for Ukrainian soldiers. It's 40 billion to secure energy and food for a massive amount of Western countries, including ourselves, by the way. So it's just important to have that perspective. And I know sometimes it gets lost in the weeds.
I was watching someone once say that a BLT, bacon, lettuce, tomato burger, is about $5 in the United States, and they did an analysis of what it would take if you got the raw materials, you got the cow, you cut it up, all that stuff. It's some upwards of like $1,600 just to like get that burger. But like the beauty of globalization and supply chains has allowed this type of consumer ease and efficiency and convenience to be in our lives. So in the context of globalization, there is a lot of rhetoric that a globalized economy is bad, that China got all these jobs instead of the United States. It actually decreased wages, depressed a lot of ability for people to get good paying jobs. And even if that's true, do you think we get to an economy that is not as globalized because of political or nationalist intentions, whatever it may be, over the next 10 years? Or do you think we expand globalization?
I think the answer is both, which is not a cop out, and I'll answer why I'm saying it that way. I think that there are some parts of our economy that require globalized approaches. I think there's some that can probably be brought more localized. But I don't remember if it was last week we talked about this or just you and I on a private conversation. I was saying how now it started about 2 years ago where all of my Dunkin' Donuts in my area had signs hanging up, $16, $17, $18 an hour plus tips.
Yes.
And now they all have kiosks where you just order off of an iPad.
I saw you tweet about this. Well, yeah.
And I think that this is the call out of like, okay, well, we want these companies to have huge margins, huge profits, and when they don't, we crap all over them and demand the CEO step down and demand they do something about the returns. And then they say, well, we can't find people to work. And then they raise the prices, and then they don't have the margins that the investors are demanding. So they have to get rid of the workers and replace with technology. So I think there's a bigger conversation than just a question of like, the workers. It's more about productivity of the workers.
Yes.
There has to be a place where this could take us down a different path, but I think I want to bring this up anyways. I think there's a big conversation to be had that could go on for days between us and many others too, for that matter, about this idea of maybe a slight twist of the knob on capitalism to think about a little bit longer term approach and less beating people up on quarterly reports and earnings.
Yeah.
I think that this hyper focus on the constant, what are your margins, top and bottom line? What is, every measurement imaginable, which we all talk about all the time. But the reality is, actually, I mean, you hear it differently than me probably. And if people watch this, they hear it differently from me as well. I don't care about earnings. I never really care about earnings. I watch earnings. I mean, it's part of a statistical analysis. It's part of a trend over time. But the reality is I'm asking the questions of like, just globally, like, hey, do we need strong analytics and data-driven decision-making in the future? Yes. Okay, who are the top players? Their performance today in a recession is utterly meaningless to me.
Yes.
But however, if there's trends or patterns within the earnings that now 4 or 5 of their competitors are showing also, that might skew my long-term 10-year, 20-year vision. I think this is the value in looking at things in a different way. And I know your question wasn't on earnings and it wasn't about margins, but it speaks to the same thing that we can't both fight inflation, fight jobless claims, and demand unbelievably huge margins. Something's got to give somewhere in that sort of triple threat there. And your point actually about the BLT is so spot on. I was thinking about this the other day, actually, where we have to take these materials out of the ground, huge effort, right? Forget about the impact on environments or localities, whatever. You have to take the stuff out of the ground, clean it, sort it, devise it into its most sort of singular use cases, right? Then it goes to a factory to get made into components. Then those components get shipped to another factory to get made into products. Then those products get shipped to a distributor. The distributor then ships it to a retail location. Then you have to go in and drive your car into that retail location, or maybe you buy it online, but then it's in another truck being delivered. And when you think about this, because I don't think it gets thought about a lot, that's how could you buy something for $25 and find out that they made a 50% margin on that when it had to be shipped 15 times, touched by 18 different people? And it's because we don't see the beginning stage cost of, like, when we say things like, oh, cost, I don't know off the top of my head, I'm going to make a total number up. So apologies to anyone who doesn't think, but like, say an iPhone costs, I don't know,
I believe it costs $1,000. They sell it for $1,000. Last time I checked, it's $300 to make it.
$300 to make it, right? So 70% margin. And you think about that, and you say like, wow, that's pretty damn good. And you're like, no, that's insane. That's not pretty damn good. That's insane. The complexity of the components and how they have to work so perfectly, and the amount of people who have to assemble that in a row. And this is where, like, this whole conversation of, if we want to bring the jobs back, which I think is great. But listen, I'm in the US. I would love to see more jobs. I want the jobless rate to be 0%. That's what I want.
But Apple's not paying $15 an hour.
Or if they do, we can't then demand a 70% margin.
Right.
Which is fine, but you just can't have both.
Yeah, because shareholders want the 70% margin, right?
Of course. Yep.
That's the point about globalization that's so interesting to me, because it's like, honestly, it's the dirty stuff that we don't care about being outshipped into a lot of other countries where like
100%.
they get paid a couple bucks an hour, but our iPhones work perfectly. And then you want to buy Apple stock. And if Apple moves down 2% because Apple is the market, the market starts going crazy. But it's like, well, so what would you expect if they had their cost of labor increased like by 15 times?
Yep.
It's a complex economy, I think, to say the least. I think your point in terms of looking over the rooftop is like that macro perspective is not just earnings or what's going on with interest rates, but it's literally what's going on in the ground to be able to make an assumption around something.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, whether we're talking about China, US, and Russia, or we're talking about margins on an iPhone, or we're talking about hiring someone to make coffee at a Dunkin' Donuts or a Starbucks, the reality is it is and will always be a balancing act, and it wants to be level. That's the problem. The theme of the show, other than no financial advice, is that everything in the world wants to reach a state of levelness, right? Even.
Yes.
And the problem is it's not the world making things out of whack. It's humans making it out of whack. I can't pay you $18 an hour unless I maintain 70% margins, but I can't maintain 70% margins by paying you $18 an hour.
Right.
So can you add $300 more to the price? Or can I charge or pay someone $5 an hour? Or the one thing that no one wants to do is, should you and I just pay a lot more for that phone, or expect better, more realistic earnings? And maybe that's okay. I think part of the problem of why we have these massive bull and bear runs is because it just gets to a case of political engineering, whether it's from a GDP perspective at the country level or a bottom line perspective and non-GAAP analysis at the individual earnings level, you know?
I did a topic in debate in high school. The topic was the United States ought or should enforce employers to pay a living wage. And a living wage is defined as like 15 an hour.
Sure.
And there's an affirmative and negative side. And I remember when I was the affirmative, it was a philosophical argument about the ethics of humans flourishing and not being paid just like god awful wages for doing work that is still commendable at the end of the day. And the negs argument, the negative would always bring up, yeah, they make $7 an hour. But if a pizza shop has $21 to give to 3 people per hour, and now you make someone pay 15, the other 2 are going home. And it's like some job is better than no job. And there's not a right or wrong answer, but it's so complex to think of these issues. It's hard to just generalize it. And
the problem though is that we're not in a state of pure capitalism because of things like subsidies and like
minimum wage laws. Yeah,
exactly. So the problem is like that shop that can only afford $21 an hour should just be out of business.
Right.
And
theoretically,
right? Yeah. Like, and someone else should be able to do it more efficiently with better machinery, more productivity. It's, this is the theory of it anyways. What we all know is that in practicality, we're trying to take something that's very difficult to do, fit it inside of a very small box, make it fit perfect, while also demanding the most optimized approach to it imaginable. And when you say it like that, the absurdity of the entire thing comes out a little bit, right? Like as a perfect example, not to jump, I don't want to have a whole conversation about it, but you and I talk about Palantir quite a bit. You do a lot. I look at this and I'm like, okay, who cares if their earnings aren't great? Like, you're either trying to build something to transform the world or you're not. And this goes for any company for that matter. You're trying to make the best pizza, the best toothbrush, or provide the best daycare. I don't care what it is. Like, it does take time to build those things. And the best can't also always be with the best margins, right? Some things are just inherently expensive to do. So,
well, I think that
transitions geopolitical.
Yes, and that transitions to the next conversation on earnings. I think so I never used to get excited over earnings seasons because I didn't really care too much about like earnings, even if I cared about the stock market. But I think the CNBC, if a gamification of like, oh, this week we got Tesla, this week, it turned it into a game, and it's honestly great theater. It's great entertainment. So how do you, I know you said you don't care too much about earnings.
Yep.
How do you play earnings? Do you actually trade them? Do you look at the companies and you're like, okay, if I have a long position in Tesla, I'm looking at it, but my thesis is not adjusting. And do you kind of buy into the game of earnings seasons because it's something to care about when developing moats for your investments?
Great question. So I want to give you both a practical real world answer and then also a larger scale approach. The practical real world answer is if I'm expecting a high degree of volatility coming out of earnings, which is reasonable, this kind of we're at a strange vertex of unknown and risk of recession, while also talking about possibly 0.75 or 1% increases in our Fed rates. So there's a lot of wild things going on, right?
Yes.
So if I'm in the market and I'm looking to make money on earnings near term, right? Near term, 24 hours, 6 months, whatever. What I'm doing, and I'm going to literally say it, just in part of our show, it's not financial advice. It's not easy to do. But if I'm going to do it, what I'm doing is I'm going to trade straddles on the positions I feel the strongest about. Also on the positions I feel like have the most surprise built into them. And the way this works is, for those who don't know, a straddle is an options trading strategy where you don't know what direction the stock is going to move in, but you expect it to go way up or way down.
Yep.
So what you do is you buy a call and you buy a put the exact same time, the exact same strike price, usually right at the money, and you're going to pay a premium for each excuse me, for each contract. Let's just say, super rough numbers to keep this really basic, $100 for the call, $100 for the put. You paid $200 total. So you need the price to move enough that you make more than $200 in total profit so that your net profit is positive. It's literally that simple.
And that's why you get both sides of the upside.
You can catch both sides. Now, the inverse is a thing called a strangle. A strangle is where you say, look, I don't think this thing's going to move at all. It's going to stay within a relative a band of trading of dollar amount. It's just the inverse, right? I'm going to try to play it within a certain point as opposed to up above or below. So that's how I would do earnings from a practical perspective. Now, if you are a large holder of stock, one other thing to think about is you could always marry puts or just buy some protective puts to hedge yourself. If you have a large position that you expect to go down, if you can make some money on that, you can then use that to DCA further into a position that you like. Yep. Again, the reason why I think this is, I was thinking about this during the week, actually. I love the name of the show because I think it's really true. It's a joke on YouTube oftentimes that, all these people who don't really know what they're talking about in the first place are also saying it's not financial advice. It's like, well, no kidding, ding dong. You don't even know what you're talking about. You're making stuff up as you go. The reason why we say it, and the reason you need to hear it as a listener to this, is financial advice can only be taken serious if I understand your full financial position, your budget, your earnings, your expenses, your cash flow as a family, how many kids you have, when you plan to retire, you're going to pay for college, you're paying for a wedding, how many car payments do you have, right? Like, to understand a person's true financial capabilities and what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing, it really requires knowing a lot about them. So when we say things like, here's what I might do, well, keep in mind, I have a very large, very balanced portfolio. I own real estate and businesses, and I have a large degree that's available for speculative investing and trading. So for me, playing straddles as a form of extra capital accumulation, it's no brainer.
Good deal. Yeah.
For a lot of people, you shouldn't even be thinking about it like this. You should be using earnings as a way to learn. Like, this is the other side that I was gonna get to anyway. So it's a perfect segue to it. Is the thing that I'm looking for out of earnings. I think we might have tweeted about this earlier, but I'm looking for like key names to tell me what's really happening in the real world, what they're seeing, and then what they're saying is likely to happen based on what they know. So I think
these are not your A-star companies. These are different companies, correct?
Correct. I don't care if they're necessarily the best Fortune 100 or 50. I just know what they do and who's using their products. So as an example, I think during the week we were tweeting about, you tweeted like, hey, which earnings reports are you looking at? And I said Amex and Snap-on, and I'll tell you reasons for both. I don't care at all about the prices. I'm not full transparency. I'm not playing either. I'm not opening any new positions. I'm not going to have any options. Nothing.
Do you own those positions at all?
I don't own either directly, but probably in an ETF somewhere. So, but I'm not going to buy or sell those anyways right now. So, the reason these two are interesting for me is Amex is really interesting because Visa and MasterCard, obviously they're major players, right? Discover's pretty much right there, and Amex is right there too. But like put Discover, MasterCard, and Visa aside for a second. Amex is really interesting because they also have a lot to do with travel and business expenses and overall spend from a 360 perspective. So a lot of entrepreneurs will have their business card as an Amex and then also have a personal Amex.
Because they get a lot of points and rewards for using
exactly the reason. Bingo. In my house, it's the same thing. I have Amex for business and I have Amex for personal. The reason this is particularly interesting is because they have a lot of data about consumer spending and business spending, and it's not hard to look at correlations between the two from a direct perspective. It's also interesting to see what they're seeing from a standpoint of new applications, new business applications. So any kind of information we can glean from them is going to be very derivative because it's baseline. One of the first things you do when you start a new business, an LLC, your first S Corp, a solopreneur, you go and get your tax ID or your EIN number, and you usually get a credit card, right? Because you want to start building credit for your business. Amex is one of the first ones a lot of people get. So looking at things like application growth, spend growth, things like that, that's really, really baseline. What kind of capital is being given out? Is it being used? Who's using it? What's the interest rates on it, et cetera? So for me, Amex is a big one. And the other one, which I think a lot of people seem to be surprised by, was Snap-on. So Snap-on is a really cool business model. Do you know Snap-on's business model?
No, I didn't. I thought it was Snapchat. I was like, what's
no. This is really interesting. This is like in the weeds that I'm actually relieved you said that, because I thought it was gonna be boring if you said the other way. So Snap-on sells really high-end hand tools for mechanics. They're a very high quality name. They're very, very expensive tools. Okay. So what they do is, you as a Snap-on distributor, you sign up. It's me, it's Sean. I'm a Snap-on distributor. I have my own truck. It's full of all the tools I could possibly buy. I drive around to all the local garages and I try to get them to buy my stuff. We then offer financing for the tools through Snap-on, and you pay me every month or however the financing is for the tools, because they are really expensive. And these are tools that are used to put the tires on, to fix the engine, to repair the doors and the windows, right? Like anything on a vehicle, as an example, that's broken, you're going to be buying those tools, especially from Snap-on. You're going to see what's financed, what kind of income they have, if sales are up or down. This is the exact kind of entry to the economy I'm looking for. As I like to think that the way I approach things is very different than everyone else out there. There's 10,000 people on YouTube, Twitter, or any other channel talking about the same 10 stocks, the same 2 cryptos, the same one entrepreneurship approach, the one how to buy a single family and rent it for $1,000. Great. And there's a great place for all these people. It's phenomenal. There's people who are a little bit better. They read 10Ks and understand 10% of it, but that's okay. What I'm saying is, the approach to understanding things is about understanding things, not companies. But like, looking at Snap-on is a great example for me to understand, are people getting the cars maintained, and what kind of work is being done? Is the growth of the tools going up? Can we break it down even more? Are they financing it? And it's important because this means that wrenches are turning, people are working, they're back in the shops, cars are coming back in, things are being done. This translates to more tires being sold, more car parts being sold. This translates perhaps to less cars being bought brand new or leased, more people holding on to used cars longer. The derivative information, just from understanding how many lug nuts and wrenches were sold, is massive.
Right.
But you have to take the time to understand the importance of why one leads to another and where it ultimately spreads up and out, right?
That goes back to our discussion in the beginning, right?
It's literally top down and bottoms up. That's how you get to a really good place in the middle.
No, it's very interesting. I mean, and it's, for me, I'm much younger in my investing career, and something like Snap-on, it's like, this is why I like talking to you about this, because the derivative information that you've derived from wrenches and nuts and bolts being sold gives such a broader outlook, because then it tells you about, what's going on in the car market, how, like, this stuff is interesting, and this stuff you don't get from a Facebook advertising spend is going down. It's like, yeah, that's important. It's it's not the entire system.
Well, and the problem there also, just to make a final point, is any scam artist or 16-year-old or 80-year-old can fire up a $9 .com, say they're the CEO of a company, and spend $32 on Facebook.
Yep.
And it has nothing to do with the economy at scale. It could be selling some bullcrap course or some scammy white paper or a good product too, maybe. But it's not speaking to the true scale of like a tool in a person's hand, putting a new part on a car,
Right. Quick thoughts on Tesla and Netflix. Tesla, if earnings are bad, do you still feel it's an EV leader, or do you think it has some weak spots going forward if they have one bad earnings?
Yeah.
Given they had the lockdowns in Shanghai for the past couple months.
I think that if you're looking, there are people who know Tesla better than I. We both know who they are. There's a lot of really good people in that space. Purely from an economic and sort of macro view, there was a known slowdown on purpose to get things up and running and more efficient. I think that if Tesla's almost like the most perfect example of short-term thinking leads to long-term profit loss. Now, you might think that they're going down, and that's fine. Back your thesis up. You might think they're going up. That's fine. Back your thesis up. But for me, whatever happens in this earnings report is completely meaningless to me. I don't care at all.
Do you feel it's a pandemic stock that hasn't fully fell? Like Zoom collapsed, Roku collapsed, all the like Tesla's the only one. Obviously, it went from 1,200 to 700, but 1,200 was a bit insane. But $700 billion is the market cap. It's 750 today or something.
I think that there's two unique things within Tesla that are going to be interesting. I don't know that I'm an expert enough to give a valid thought on this, but I'm going to try. The two things that I innately are drawn to is charging and access to lithium. So the problem is we know damn well that it's going to get harder and harder to get our hands on lithium, no matter who you back from an EV perspective. Okay.
Yep.
So what I'm curious to see is like, are they having trouble getting what they need for materials? Will there be any comments on that? That's one thing I'm watching. And I said there was 2 points. There's really three. The other piece is the chip side of it. Are they getting the chips they need? Are we seeing slowdowns in chips? Are chip picking back up again? So those two things from like a non-stock perspective, but just a supply perspective, I'm particularly interested in hearing about, not just for Tesla, but for the whole sort of business anyways. My fear with what happened during the past couple of years here is we saw a lot of people. I mean, personally, I know a ton of people, and then there's lots of good data out there too. But just from an anecdotal perspective, myself, I know a bunch of people who were living like right within the city or the very next city over, right? A quick train ride from work. And as more and more have left the city to move into the suburbs, more like, hey, where they want to live without having to worry about it. I just worry like when these cars start going back into the city or start driving in, where are they going to charge? How is it going to be able to be efficiently taken care of? Now, maybe there's a huge opportunity. Someone's going to start opening garages with tons of like pay by the hour charging stations. Maybe that's a great idea for someone who can afford that. But those are my fears with Tesla. It's not anything to do with the stock or the current. Their margins are great. They've got great innovation. You know, their technology's, I mean, absolutely on the edge. I mean, there's no one doing it. There is no one doing it better. You can argue it, but I just don't believe it, right? Unless you can show it to me. So like they're doing everything right. So I don't care about earnings for them. I care about where will the bottlenecks be that will, instead of having like a quarter down from like, you know, a manufacturing facility, where is there potential to be down for 2 years? What if we can't get lithium at all? You know, what if China decides to go to war with Taiwan? And now we have to step in and do something, right? From a US perspective. Right. Those are my massive concerns, is like, Elon is smart. Elon can control a lot, but he can't control China taking Taiwan on or fighting in the water over there between Japan and all these other countries. So it's like, there's a lot of things that could happen that could really screw them up, and it won't screw Ford up or GM up. Now, I'm not saying they're serious competitors. I don't think that they are, but just for the record, if there was ever a way to get a wedge in, that's going to be one of those ways they can potentially get an edge in, you know, because they haven't really done the same kind of motions yet, in my opinion. I don't know. I don't think it's a good answer because I don't know enough about.
Well, Elon doesn't have to worry about Twitter either anymore, so that helps with Tesla.
We'll see.
Quick thing on Netflix. Netflix, New York Times reports, hopes The Gray Man, a $200 million film starring Ryan Gosling and directed by the brothers behind Avengers Endgame, can be the sort of a blockbuster franchise. Yeah, attract subscribers. They're expecting to lose 2 million this quarter. How do you feel about Netflix?
Have you watched the preview for The Gray Man?
No, but someone watched it in my Discord and they told me it's not good.
Oh my God, it looks so boring.
Yeah.
I will not watch it. It looks so painfully boring. I don't see how I could get into it. And especially when like you've
200 million is a big budget. Those are box office budgets.
Like listen, I saw Top Gun 2 with my kids recently, right? That was a big movie that you want to see in a movie theater. And they had a preview for Mission Impossible. I forget the name of whatever, part 1, which means there's going to be 2. Like those are movies I want to go to the movie theater and see. It's huge. It's action. It's exciting. It's made for the big screen. Some things don't work. Like Jack Ryan, they made some for the movie theater, and then John Krasinski made some for I forget who that was. Amazon Prime, maybe, whoever it was.
I think so.
Really cool, well done show. Good character. It makes a ton of sense. Gosling, to me, is not the right person for that role, nor did it even look or feel interesting. You know how he sort of has that affect of like I'm ultra common movies, even though
Yep.
coming at me. It's like, dude, it's okay to get excited, and you don't have to play the same character in every movie. And I just think it looks like it's going to be a flop. I mean, people will watch it, but I don't think it's going to get what they need. What Netflix needs is so far beyond what I can probably answer. I don't know. I mean,
they need Microsoft to buy them. Like
I mean, that's the thing. Like Squid Game, amazing. But then the problem is now
best thing ever.
You have to wait years to get something back. I don't blame them. I mean, of course, it takes a long time to make a show. I mean, you understand how hard it is to make content. But for crying out loud, like when you have a big hit and there's nothing to follow it, it's like, geez, man, like look at HBO, look at Showtime, look at all the other premium networks we've all grown up around. They may not always have had a Sopranos, but there's always something else at least moderately interesting that you want to tune into.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm a humongous Westworld fan. I absolutely love it. I just watched the new episode today on a break, and I was like, oh my God, I'm hooked again. Now I can't wait for the next one. And they do a great job of having enough really great shows and then good shows too. Like, Game of Thrones, sure, last season ruined the show, but overall they had people hooked for almost a full decade. Yeah. Now they're coming out with like the prequels around the dragons, and you watch those previews and you're like, I want to watch that. And that's the HBO quality you're getting. Netflix is stuck between a rock and a hard place because they're trying to grow a tech company. I know people argue on that, but grow a tech company, appease earnings, which is going to be tough, and consistently bring in massively interesting content, while at the same time trying to make sure the content's also friendly to everyone. Right. And so that means there's also a lot of controversy. So there's a lot of people who are like, I'm canceling my subscription because you're pushing this, which I think is negative. And then a whole other group of people are saying, I'm quitting because you're pushing this that I find is offensive. And they've got this unique challenge of not being included with much. Like for us in my area, we get Netflix for free. So I could care less. Like if I watch, I watch. If I don't, I don't.
It's interesting because from 2010 to 2015, they were an aggregator of content. It's like you didn't think of them as a media company. You thought of them as a legitimate office friends. Everyone licensed their content to Netflix because it was the best technology in terms of streaming service to get that content. But when that
was amazing,
when that rug is pulled, then you've got to turn into a media company.
You talk all the time, man, about distribution. Netflix was able to give distribution to all sorts of stuff. I know you're not the same age as me, so you may not have really done this, but like, do you remember going into like a Blockbuster?
No, I did. I went to a Blockbuster. I remember I got Will Smith's I Am Legend from Blockbuster.
Okay, cool. So like, I'm going back to like the 80s and 90s here for a second. It was a big thing. Like you go and get to pick that one movie, and you're gonna watch. As a little kid, I'm gonna pick a movie and I'm gonna watch it 10 times, right?
Yeah.
And we're gonna pop some popcorn and we're gonna have some Coca-Cola. And it's like a really fun thing because the movie theaters are expensive. We can't afford to go to the movies. So we're going to rent a movie. It's going to be amazing. We watch it a ton. As we watch that industry implode for a number of reasons, right? But Netflix being the real, as you said, the aggregator of all of that. I remember getting like the little red envelope in the mail and thinking like, this is just so cool. It's a DVD. It's going to come in the mail, and I can pick any movie I want. And then when they ever came out with the digital version of it, it was like, this is insanely incredible. I have access to everything. And I think about where they are today and where it was when it first came out. What's changed? Anything? Some of their own content, but it's the same exact stuff. Like I don't even see different stuff on there anymore. My kids don't like Netflix because they think it's boring. It's the same movies for the past 5 years, and it kind of is. Yeah. They lost all the stuff to Disney, which was brutal.
That was rough.
And like, so what I wonder is, putting aside
what would make you buy the stock? Like, is there any value play you see? Is there nothing that you're just like, I'm not touching it? They still have 220 million people that pay them $16, $15 a month.
Here's my question: of that 220 million, that'd be pretty good. 220 million people, right? How many are getting it for free because they have like AT&T or Xfinity
or T-Mobile? A lot. I would say a lot. I would say a lot.
And same with Disney, by the way.
Yeah.
How many people?
I have Disney for free because I have Verizon. So
exact same. So it's like, if you started telling me like I had to pay for all these separate things, I'd probably be like, we don't need them that bad. You know what I mean? See you later. So I think that's the scarier thing. And again, I almost wonder like, what's the actual this is going to be a statement that if someone's watched this as a Netflix poll, they're going to hate what I'm about to say. What is the actual business that Netflix is in? As far as I can tell, it's just that they're trying to be a movie studio or a TV studio. Because I don't think the distribution model is now completely defunct as a differentiator, because everyone has it, right?
Right.
Their unique play of having a monthly model is defunct. So all they're really trying to do is offer me up some unique shows that no one else has.
Yes.
And they're not necessarily always that good. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe they should, you know what? That other audio company we were talking about the other day, it's like sometimes pivoting is painful and difficult. But maybe Netflix isn't really worth much at all here. Maybe they're just worth whatever any other standard media generation company's worth. Right. And before people go nuts and tell me you're totally wrong, like, I get it. I am totally wrong today in 2022, where they have 220 million subscribers. But at some point, every subscription service ultimately is just a pyramid scheme, not in an illegal way. But there are only so many subscribers, no matter how good your product is, period. Bar none, flat out, that's the answer. What happens if they have 8 billion subscribers, right? They've got every person on the planet. How do they get growth? Well, they can't. Okay, well, that's fine, but not all 8 million are part of the total addressable market. Okay, well, what's their serviceable addressable market? Okay, maybe that's 1 billion. Okay, well, what's stopping them from getting to 1 billion? Well, of that billion, actually, most people can't really swing an extra 15 a month just to watch 2 TV shows. Okay, well, maybe it's 500 million. And you start looking at it more and keep slicing and slicing and slicing. And it's like, maybe 200 to 300 million is the ideal range of who's going to be their customers. And it becomes a value play for a dividend as opposed to a growth stock. And I think that's okay. Netflix to me is a perfect example of, like, if you tell me Netflix is going to stabilize around here and they're going to stabilize on their growth and they're going to pay me a little bit of a dividend with maybe growth if things go well, hey, I'm okay holding it with a nice dividend. But as a growth stock, I don't get it. I don't get it at this point.
And I think that unique technology, if it's valued at the premiums that tech companies get, it's on one word. It's an algorithm, right? Like, that's technology. And if it's a content play, it's an algorithm that curates content. And the problem is, if it's not user generated content, there's really not that much search optimization or what are you clicking on? Like, yes, they have that. But if everyone clicks on the new Leo DiCaprio film, it's like, all right, that you got the click-through rate, you got the thumbnail impressions, but like, what else can you offer on top of that if you don't have literally millions of other pieces of content, because you don't have the users to generate that content in order to create the algorithmic technology to recommend it? So it's a media company. It's a nice media company.
It is literally a media company. I mean, is it any different than when we talk about Twitter?
No.
What is Twitter without its users putting information on it? It's nothing.
Right.
It's not. That's why it's so hard to value Twitter. Same reason. I mean, the same thing you say about Netflix is the same thing I would say about Twitter. Like, how do you find growth? Where do you extract growth from?
Because Twitter, you also got to find people that are chatty enough, like you and me, to want to express that much. Everyone wants to put up a photo, but you've got to find like intellectuals, if you want to call it like that, on Twitter.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, there's barely 200 million people that have a couple of unique things to say per day, other than hodl crypto or Bitcoin, right?
Well, so maybe this is the answer that is missing at Netflix. Is maybe they need to find a way to get better platform engagement. Like, maybe that means bringing in more regular people to have a YouTube style experience of putting their own content on as like a junior Netflix, or shows to watch or things like that. Like, they're missing the way you explained that a minute ago. I hope that makes its way to an executive at Netflix, because my engagement can't begin and end with the title and the credits.
Yes. Yep.
That's not engagement. That's me watching a show that I would have watched on Xfinity On Demand if it was available.
100%.
That's not a value prop. And I think that if you can get me engaged in something, even like voting for my favorite new creator on Netflix, or voting for my favorite show on Netflix, and I'm not saying it's going to do much, but like, you've got to get me engaged. It's not enough without engagement. And I know this is way off topic, but I think it relates to the same point. You can as a creator on Facebook, you can monetize on Twitter. On Snapchat, on TikTok, rather. I'm gonna reset. If you want to monetize as a creator, it's easy to do on Facebook. It's easy to do on YouTube. It's easy to do on TikTok. I'm not insinuating people can make tons of money. Maybe you could, but realistically, probably not. But my point is, it's easy to do it. The problem with Twitter is their entire success depends on people who are engaging and driving conversation and driving people to spend more time.
Yes.
And those people get no benefit for being
Yes.
those creators on there. So what they do is they use Twitter. This is the great irony of Twitter that many people probably don't know. Twitter is nothing more than a jump off point for people who are creating content on other platforms.
That's it.
I shared this the other day. I got a lot of flack actually for this, but I'm going to say it again anyways. I think TikTok is just a jumping off point for OnlyFans, because I have never liked an inappropriate video ever on TikTok, but that's all that I get.
But they know you're a man. They know you're, yep.
Well, and that's the problem, right? I literally don't want it on my phone because my kids look at my phone. No, they don't look at TikTok, but God forbid. Some of the stuff, it's like, I don't want, even by accident, I don't want them to see
pseudo porn.
Yeah. It is literally right at the edge. And all it is just ads for like, want to see more?
Yep.
Check the link.
Yep.
And that's why, like, yeah, TikTok is crazy engaging, but for how long? Until the next one comes along. And then the next one's going to be totally engaging. So the next one comes along. And I think the companies that are going to do really well, I'm gonna make a comment on Snap, even though earlier I said I wouldn't, but this is purely about an outgoing technology perspective. What makes Snap really different is they have amazing messaging services and fun, but actually useful technology outside of the application of social media, like being able to put backgrounds on or funny faces. If you look at it as just a funny face, it seems silly. If you look at it for augmented reality, however, that's a much bigger play. TikTok doesn't have that. Twitter doesn't have that. That's why you don't get the level of engagement. Simply staring at doing this, it looks like engagement to an investor who doesn't know, but this is not engagement. Yeah. This is me just being dulled into falling asleep tonight looking at some pictures, like you said a moment ago with Instagram.
Right.
So I think it speaks to the fact that Netflix is just long form Twitter. I'm going to watch just enough to see the one piece of content I want, and then I'm out. If Netflix could find a way to generate more, I know how this is like a gigantic ask, but I'm just saying they need something that's so far out of the box that they have people rushing to be on their platform. And maybe the way they do that is they have an entire program for kids who want to get started in creating content or making movies or young actors or plays or music. I don't know. All I'm saying is there's an entire world of people who want to create stuff. Maybe they can have a whole program to help them create it and get on the show ultimately. And maybe it's reality TV that they host themselves for people who are creating TV shows or creating movies. And you can now watch that as a fan of Netflix and vote on what's going to be made into a series. Now you are engaged. Now when it comes out, you want to watch it. And then those people will also push that show for them because they want people to watch this show so they win,
Yeah, I 100% agree. Here's the conundrum that I think Netflix is in, and it is the conundrum that is the philosophy that is driving everything I'm trying to do right now with the things I'm building, which is that attention has fundamentally shifted from premium to authentic. YouTube Red started in 2015. They started making originals where they were like paying Marquez Brownlee, which is like one of the biggest tech creators, to have his own original show. And they quickly realized no one wants to watch this like high-tech produced like YouTube original. They just want to watch Marquez Brownlee do an iPhone unboxing review because he can make the video himself. And like, he has these little jokes and insiders that only his fans who were watching him from 2009 understand. It's this authentic relationship that will never get you to not watch his video on the platform of YouTube, which means all the power goes back to YouTube. Netflix tries to do that with marketing the reality TV shows on stars on Instagram, but that authentic relationship just isn't there at the same level of what a random guy who lives in New Jersey who's talking about stocks in his basement gets in terms of excitement and energy. So if that's the case, if you said Netflix needs to open up a program for creators, I mean, why don't they just go full on and say, all right, YouTube, we're coming after you. Hey, Netflix is now a user-generated content platform. And now I don't know what's the unique differentiation. They got to figure that out. But like,
agreed. I think the problem is it speaks to like such a terrible answer though.
Yes.
That the only reason YouTube can afford to pay people to create content is because of ad dollars.
Yes.
And then it brings us right back to the conversation no one wants to have is, should Netflix just be putting ads on all their stuff, which is the model they're talking about doing. As an investor, does that do anything for me at all?
Right.
The answer is God, no.
Right.
My God, no. Because all you're doing is taking the same, 100% of total advertising and giving everyone a teensy little less of a sliver so they can get a little tiny sliver. And it's like, no, man. I mean,
And the reason it works for YouTube is because the entire world is uploading in one place, right? So the level of ads in terms of the hyper specificity of targeting, like I don't even know if these Netflix ads are going to be good because but YouTube ads, we know the data is pretty decent. But if you're Netflix and you decide to become a YouTube, like what exactly is the differentiated variable from advertising that you get to, pop on?
And I think we both know it's not gonna, it doesn't matter because it's not going to happen anyways. That's not what, so it's going to be interesting. And so I guess I'll sum that really long diatribe up into this. Show me that you're a value stock and I can get a dividend. Maybe I'm interested in the stock. Outside of that, it's not their fault. Their growth was incredible. This is actually funny enough. It goes right back to what we were talking about earlier. We don't have realistic expectations, man. No company can grow forever. It's absurd to think that they can. At some point, they've maxed out that part of the business, and now it becomes about optimizing the experience and getting me to watch not 2 shows, but 20 shows, or I don't know, whatever, right? That's how you get me to be on the platform more. That's how you get more licensing and royalties and all this other stuff. So anyways, those are my thoughts there.
I agree. All right, last question, Sean. It's going to be a little bit of a very blunt and open question, so allow me to set it up, and I'm going to share my screen here.
Sure.
Is President Joe Biden a bad person for bumping fists with the Prince of Saudi Arabia after calling him a pariah for potentially allegedly ordering the murder, U.S. intelligence has learned, of a journalist named Jamal Khashoggi? President Biden visited Saudi Arabia to go beg for more oil because our oil prices are in the gutter. And if OPEC can produce some more oil, we have more supply, which leads to less demand, more competition, leads to prices going down. But in order to do this, he had to kind of walk back on his original words of not walk back, but basically suck it up and go visit someone that he said is not an ethical person. Is he a bad person, or is this the costs and benefits of living in a globalized economy where things are interchangeable and you have to do certain things because you don't want Americans paying $7 a gallon for gas?
I'm going to answer the question, but I want to read something to you first, okay? I didn't know you were going to ask that question. So just to be clear for anyone who sees, I did not know he was going to ask that question. But I was actually looking at something earlier today around, I was reading an article about China-Russia relations, which led me to these things called fact sheets. Funny enough, I'm literally pulling it up on my screen right. I'm not going to share it because it's just a couple paragraphs here, but I want to read this to you real quick. So it's basically a note from the White House about the results of the bilateral meeting between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. Okay. Yes. So I want to read. These are all of the things that that supposedly came out of this meeting. Okay. Now I don't know how much of this is real or not, and I'm not going to read all of it. So I'm going to go fast here. And each of these has its own couple of paragraphs. So I'm going to read right down the list. These results of the meeting include the following. Number 1, removing peacekeepers from Tehran Island. Number 2, opening Saudi airspace to civilian aircraft flying to and from Israel. Number 3, sustaining the UN-mediated truce in Yemen. Number 4, support for PGII. Number 5, new bilateral framework for cooperation. Number 5G and 6G. Number 6, new cooperation on energy security. Number 7, new bilateral framework on clean energy cooperation. Number 8, underscoring human rights concerns. Number 9, cybersecurity cooperation. Number 10, cooperation in space exploration. Number 11, public health cooperation. Number 12, enhanced maritime security cooperation. 12A, Red Sea. 12B, Gulf of Oman, North Arabian Sea. 12C, unmanned and AI integrations. Number 13, integrated air defense cooperation. And on and on and on and on. You're telling me all those things were discussed by Biden in a meeting with Jeddah.
Biden's a good communicator. He got it done.
I'm not, and for the record, I'm not even criticizing Biden right now. I'm saying they didn't meet for 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So they went in both with a checklist, and then they left it to the ambassadors and the professional negotiators to work through these things. And this was their way to come out of that meeting, both looking positive, working on lots of items that ultimately mean, very little will ever get done. Because when you come out of a meeting with 13 plus things that require global communication and execution, most likely none of them will get done. The reason I want to share that before I answer your question is everything has become show, because the world of social real time now has bled so deep into politics, it's almost never going to be out again.
Yep.
So the fist bump thing was almost,
It was choreographed. I mean, I think they told them, "Hey, we're not
I
going to
think
shake
it's
your
almost
hands."
more. It's almost like choreographed, but even worse because, um,
If he shook his hand, it would seem worse, even though it's literally the same as a fist bump, right? But it would seem.
the fist bump feels worse to me. I know this
Yes.
is really
Yes.
petty, but
Yes.
like, I don't walk up to my best friends and like formally shake their hand and smile for a picture. You walk up and like you do a little, you do your thing, right? A fist bump, that picture literally looks like two great buddies who are like, dude, don't worry about it, man. I got
Right. Right.
you cut the guy up into a lot of pieces, dude, no biggie. And like,
We need oil.
yeah, like I don't know if a lot of people really followed that, but like that was dude, they had videos of duffel bags. I mean,
I watched the 4-hour documentary this weekend on it because I
okay.
was so inspired. Or it was playing
Okay.
in the background, but like it was.
No, but I get what you. Can I do the same? So like when you understand that this is a reporter who's trying to expose them, and they cut him up into pieces and put him in duffel bags. It's a human being who is literally trying to report on something. There's not a lot of gray area, even politically, for something like this, and it speaks exactly full 180 to the way we started this conversation. This is why we have to ensure we have tight relationships globally to access energy infrastructure. And this is also why we need to make sure we're in a position in the US to be a net exporter so that we always have what we need without having to worry about bringing it in from other places. But yeah, man, I don't know. I don't think a handshake was the right thing, and I don't think a fist bump was the right thing. I think it would have been perfectly okay to be, look, it's a photo op, let's be honest, right? So either way, it's a photo op, but like, I think if he walked up and like put his hand on his shoulder or something silly like this, I can't believe I'm talking like this, but I really, it's important. If it was more of like, and I'm in charge, I'm the president of the United States kind of play, don't touch him, maybe just give him a look, don't smile. You can't be fist bumping and smiling and being like, I told him what's up afterwards.
But you agree Biden had to go to at least get this oil crisis under a little control. Like it was a good thing that or not a good thing, but given the globalized nature of our economy, it was an almost necessary thing at this moment.
I mean, look, should the leaders of two major energy, countries be talking? Yeah, they should be. Was it going to be bad no matter what? 100%. Did it have to be bordering on silly? No, it didn't have to be silly. But again, it's unfortunate. Like I don't think, part of the problem with looking at things from a macro, which not a lot of people do, frankly. So this is why, like I feel very lucky in a sense that my natural inclination is to go really high or really low, because it means I can filter out a lot of BS by the time I get to the middle. The problem with looking at things from the macro is you see stuff like this and you're like, oh my God, no, like, come on, man. I mean, because then what happens is now, Israel, of course, is like, what? You're fist bumping this dude? Like, what are you doing? Yeah. And then all the other countries who are dealing with issues where Saudi Arabia has their hands in the pie, and I'm not crapping on the Saudis either. I'm just saying from a geopolitical perspective, like it's like the reason why we have everything written down, we use documents, we have paper, and we have ambassadors, and we have public transcriptions. It's so that there cannot be miscommunication. A handshake is a neutral thing. It means nothing, but means a lot.
Yeah.
Right. It's a connection between two people. It's a formal business thing. A fist bump, and I'm not being silly here, honestly. It's just like, is that where we are? I mean, yeah, it's like, I mean, you guys should have like broken into like a dance, and at least that would have been funny, I guess.
Might as well hugged each other. Yeah, it's just like...
seriously, like I mean, it's like what's next? Like high fives as you walk by. I mean, right. Whatever. It's stuff like that bothers me because I do pay a lot of attention to that global perspective, and like this wasn't some fun, silly meeting. This was literally about ensuring that there's equitable access to energy throughout the globe across multiple. This isn't just U.S. and Saudi. As you start from that list, this is about protection of water and seas. This is about cybersecurity. This is about integrations between communications, etc.
Opening up the air.
Right? Exactly. Like I'll leave it at that. These are serious things, and the look of not being serious. Sometimes that first, when you throw the rock in the lake and you get the first couple of ripples, not that big, and then by the time it hits shore, a wave's coming on. And it's important to understand that everything has an impact, and things like that get paid attention to.
Yeah. All right, that's it. Good old 60 minutes. Thank everybody,
Yeah,
or thank you everybody for watching. Let us know in the comments what you thought. We talked about a lot of stuff. Hopefully gave a good perspective on how to think about earnings more philosophically and the geopolitical macro issues that we have right now in our time. We will see you next week, same on Tuesdays. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.
Today's Monday, by the way.
But this will be up on Tuesday. So
Okay.
that'll be, yes. So see you guys.
See you later.